Were you ever bullied, or were you ever a bully? In today's world, bullying has reached epidemic proportions. Social media has created a landscape where bullying is now a 24/7 reality that for some never ends. One bullying victim describes his experience this way. I was bullied all through elementary school. The part that hurt the most was the misunderstanding that my value was worth much less than that of the people bullying me. I mattered less than those people did. I had few friends because people didn't want to associate with me and become collateral damage. What can we do to build resilience in the bullied and stop the bullies? Stick with us for a practical, gospel-centered conversation on bullying and what we can do about it with counselor Julie Lowe on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, here we are, episode 44. I can hardly believe that we've got 43 under our belt. We're working on 44 right now. And we're grateful for everybody who's listened, everybody who's become a faithful listener. And kudos to Chris and Kenton for the good work they've done on this podcast. You guys have done a good job.
Thanks to you and Jason, who isn't here with us today, but
right.
We'll send him some thanks as well.
Once again, I think we're 2 in a row now without Jason. So we sent him down to the minors, and we're hoping to pull him up for our next recording. But he's been gone quite a bit during the summer, so we've let him have some time off.
PED suspension.
Yeah. If you don't know what a PED is, you might want to look that up. So
it's different than a PFD. Personal flotation device.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Yep.
I'm glad you clarified that because it was, I was actually scratching my head there. I wasn't sure what that was, so that's good. Yeah. Well, we're at episode 44, and this is one that I've been looking forward to because we're going to have a conversation with someone, Julie Lowe, a counselor with the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation, who has done a lot of work on a lot of different issues people face in today's world, one of those being an issue that we all need to be aware of, concerned about, tracking with, and working to address prophetically, preventively, and redemptively, as we like to say here at CPYU. That issue is bullying. And before we get to Julie, I'm just curious. As I prepared for this, I actually shared with Lisa, so I asked her, I said, were you bullied when you were growing up? I'm curious about that. And she shared a couple of stories with me, specifics of incidents that she remembers. She was actually able to name the person. That sparked me to actually remember an incident that I had not thought about for years when I was, I think, in 7th grade at Huntington Junior High School. We were in gym class, which they used to bully us just with the activities we had to do. Did you guys have any of that? Climbing the ropes, doing gymnastics on the apparatus? Oh, yeah. You had to do that, Kenton?
Yeah, we had ropes and all that.
Okay, all right. And I remember at one point when we were in the unit on ropes, which was, man, that was tough and frightening when you think about that, going up to our gym ceiling was so high.
And they put, a 2-inch pad down
That's
below.
That's where I'm going. The mat was there. And I remember I was laying on the mat. I don't know if I was forced to the mat or if I had fallen from the ceiling and I was just laying there. I won't mention the name of the person, but it suddenly came back to me, this incident where he stood over me and stood on my neck with both of his feet and would not let me up and was saying all kinds of things. I actually went and found him on Facebook. I was just curiosity got the best of me, like, all these years later, 50 years later, what is this guy doing? But I went back and thought quite a bit about that, and I'm sure today as we talk about this, everyone will be thinking about situations in which they've been bullied or they have been the bully. What about you guys? Do you have memories of that, either side of that, perpetrator, victim? Kenton, were you bullied?
I don't know. And I say that because
maybe you were picked on.
In family growing up, my brother was 9.5 years older than me.
Yeah.
And everyone in my family will tell him that he was very mean as a kid.
Yeah.
And so that came out onto me. But to me, that was just family relationships.
Okay.
And so then in turn, he was rough on me. So I thought that was normal.
Yeah.
So I may have been a bully to other people without knowing it.
Yeah.
Just thinking this is how friends interact. And so I was probably a little bit more rough.
Yeah.
Than people wanted me to be.
Yeah. That all turns around. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, the one specific incident I remember is riding the bus to school in 3rd grade. And it was one of those scenarios. I was one of the last stops before getting to the school.
Yeah,
so
wait a minute, your mother didn't drive you to school every day?
No.
Oh, that's right.
No.
This was the old days.
Actually, I would ride my bike most of the time, but I just happened to ride the bus. That day.
What an irresponsible set of parents you had.
Oh, the good old days, right?
Yeah. Did you play outside by yourself too?
Yes, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
I crossed the street even.
Did you really?
I did. Wow. Yeah. It was amazing
the
days.
Old days, yeah. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Only when I took the shock collar off.
Before.
But
doesn't surprise me your parents would put one of those on you. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
But the seats were all full, so I had to stand in the aisle. Because by the time I got on the bus,
old days.
And I happened to be wearing a bright red pair of sweatpants. And I remember getting depantsed on the bus and standing in the middle of the aisle, so it certainly felt like everybody saw it. And, that was one of the incidents of bullying from my childhood I vividly remember.
That would make the national news now.
It's the kind of thing that would probably make a big deal.
Because it would be videotaped and that whole thing. You'd be pixelated.
I can imagine what that would have done to me if, for instance, that was all of a sudden that became trending and everybody at school saw that. So at the end of the day, a handful of people, saw me standing in my underwear.
Yeah, and if that was actually perpetrated in today's world, might even be perpetrated like, hey, let me get my camera ready.
Absolutely.
And let's do this, and we'll post it, try to get all the hits. Yeah, so I'm sure everybody has a story, and these are the kinds of things that when you are with your youth group or parents, when you're with your kids, be vulnerable. Ask these questions. Talk about your past and incidents because, bullying has changed in terms of its nature and intensity and how it's carried out. We'll talk more about that. But bullying has always been around. This is interesting, I asked people today in preparation for this on Facebook. I said, hey, if you have a story you want to share, I'm not going to say your name. I'll keep it anonymous. But were you bullied or did you bully? You have something you want to share. Give me a couple of sentences on this. Hey, listen to this first one, okay? This one was interesting. This is the first one that came in when I made the request. Personal message. Says, my dad bullied me by not believing that I was able to do more than hold a flashlight for him. I felt horrible for him thinking that I could be nothing more than a flashlight holder. I said I wouldn't say who sent that. That's from my 30-year-old son, Josh. Which I don't know why he keeps bringing this up. But, he's a dad to 2 boys now. And for Christmas last year, we got both those boys flashlights. So, yeah, Josh. And he's going to do the same thing to his kids. My dad did that to me. But on a more serious note, that was an actual response. But here are some responses. Let me read a couple of these very quickly. I was bullied all through grade school. The part that hurt the most was the misunderstanding that my value was worth much less than that of the people bullying me. I mattered less than those people did. I had few friends because people didn't want to associate with me and become collateral damage. How about this one? And I don't. My comments, that Josh sent to me is not meant to diminish this at all because there is bullying that takes place in the home at the hands of family members, even parents, sadly. Here's one. This is somebody who responded, said, my dad terrorized and bullied me at home, so I took that pain to school and bullied others. I was fighting all the time. That kind of reminds me of The Breakfast Club, the movie The Breakfast Club, when you look at some of the characters there and the stories that are told about that. Here's another one from a female. This is someone who's actually now a pastor. Says, as a middle school student, I was called, quote-unquote, crypt keeper. We didn't have cable, so I had no idea what this meant until I saw an ad for Tales from the Crypt. That name has continued to haunt me even to this day. Here's another one that's really tough to listen to. I was in 4th grade some 32 years ago when the teacher that I looked up to the most used my name in a sentence in spelling class. The word was Weigh, W-E-I-G-H. The sentence, and I'll insert a fictitious name here. By the time that Bob Smith is in high school, he will weigh 300 pounds. That's what the teacher said in front of the class.
That one would make national news as well nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, it carries on here. My self-esteem and my spirit was crushed. I struggled for years. Some 32 years later, I still remember the embarrassment and shame that I felt about my own body. So those are just a few. There's more. If I had time, I'd read more, but that's what that is. I looked for some definitions of bullying as well, and just a couple of definitions here. One comes, I went to the stopbullying.gov site, and this is a place, facts about bullying. It's stopbullying.gov, and it says this about a definition. I'm not going to read the definition, but the elements of the definition that they share. In 2014, the Centers for Disease Control and the Department of Education released the first federal uniform definition of bullying for research and surveillance. Obviously, if we have an official definition, that means there's a problem that's recognized. Listen to this. The core elements of the definition include, first, unwanted aggressive behavior. Second, observed or perceived power imbalance. So, one person's or a group of people are exercising that over another individual or group. And thirdly, repetition of behaviors or high likelihood of repetition. In other words, it keeps going on. The definition goes on to include some other elements, which are modes and types of bullying by which youth can be bullied or can bully others. So the two modes of bullying include, first, direct bullying. That's bullying that occurs in the presence of a targeted youth. And secondly, indirect bullying. In other words, this is bullying not directly communicated to a targeted youth. It would include things like spreading rumors or even, I would say, cyberbullying now. And then also the four types of bullying include these broad categories, 4 broad categories. First, physical bullying. We know what that is. That's what I described on the mat. The second element of that was verbal bullying. That's the second type, and that was present when I was back in gym class in junior high. Third is relational bullying. This is efforts to harm the reputation or relationships of the targeted youth. And then the fourth type would be damage to property. So someone is, taking it out or doing the bullying to something that belongs to you, maybe to your house or your locker or your car or something like that. Let me share a definition of cyberbullying. This, by the way, comes from a handout that we have. It's a free handout that you can access. Youth workers get this in the hands of parents. It's on our digitalkidsinitiative.com site. It's called A Parent's Guide to Cyberbullying. We'll include a link to this on our website. By the way, how can people get to all of the podcasts and the links that are on our website, Chris? Where are we sending people?
Our main website is cpyu.org. You'll find links to the most recent podcast episodes right on the homepage, or you can visit cpyu.org/podcast and access all the episodes from there.
So they're all archived.
That's
44 after this one,
44.
And all the links. So we'll include a link to this here as well. But let me read this definition of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying occurs when a child or teen intentionally intimidates or sends unflattering or hostile messages or threats via digital media to another child or teen or about another child or teen in order to harass, hurt, stalk, frighten, extort, humiliate, or harm that person. Cyberbullying always involves minors. If an adult is involved, the behavior is then classified as cyberstalking or cyber harassment. And I think at that point, it's obviously criminal behavior. So now, again, we don't want to tell our kids just avoid it because it's criminal, but we want to talk about the morality of bullying. We want to talk about the biblical narrative and what Jesus says about bullying. So we're going to talk about that. Before we take the break and bring Julie on, I'm just going to share with you guys. I went back because I had blogged on this when it happened. And it's amazing to me that 5 years have passed since this incident, but we had a local incident here which was tragic. It really hit me fairly hard when I read about it in the newspaper because it took place just about 15 minutes from where we sit right now here in Lancaster County in a little town called Columbia, moving down south of us and on the western side of our county here. And it involved an 11-year-old girl named Jasmine Lynn Smith, who on Wednesday, August 22nd, after 2012, after I believe a few days, as I remember the story, at the Hershey Medical Center, she did die. She had made an attempt on her life that ultimately resulted in her death. And the reason for this little girl who was an honor student at Park Elementary School in Columbia, where she was going into the 6th grade, had, according to her parents, endured, and to people who knew her, endured a good long period of bullying, a lot of it cyberbullying, and it just became too much, and she took her life. So that is an extreme case, but we know it's happening a lot. So we're going to come back and have a conversation with a counselor, Julie Lowe, who can help us understand the nature of bullying, help us as parents and youth workers and others understand what to look for and how to begin to respond. So stick with us as we talk about bullying. I'm very excited to tell you about a new resource we've just launched here at CPYU. Just Add Parents is a series of ready-to-use parent meetings that feature 3 10-minute video teaching segments, each followed by a time for guided small group discussion. Youth workers, Just Add Parents is perfect for use in your parent meeting or a parent class. The teaching content is not only designed to inform parents regarding pressing cultural issues, but to equip them to respond to these unfolding realities in a gospel-centered, practical manner, all with the goal of helping you help parents lead their children into believing and behaving Christianly in today's rapidly changing culture. Each Just Add Parents meeting includes video teaching segments, PDFs of discussion questions, and other handouts. You can order Just Add Parents as either a download or on a thumb drive. I'm happy to announce that the first installment in the Just Add Parents Parent Meeting series is now available, and it's titled Tech Sensible Parenting. If you want to help your parents understand and respond proactively to kids and technology with a Just Add Parents Parent Meeting, you can learn more on our website at cpyu.org. Well, I'm pretty excited to have the conversation we're going to have today with Julie Lowe. We're going to talk about bullying. Let me just tell you a little bit about Julie, and maybe she can tell you a little bit more about herself as we work through this and some of her experience. But she is a faculty member and a counselor at the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation, which is in Glenside, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, right where I grew up. Julie holds an MA in counseling from Biblical Theological Seminary. She's a licensed professional counselor. She's worked for over 15 years, and she has extensive experience with women's issues, sexual abuse, body image issues, parenting, and child maltreatment issues, which I think obviously includes the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is bullying. She's also a play therapist. I need to hear more about that. I'm not sure that that's fun or not, but play therapist. And then also, I'm going to let you know this, Julie's married to Greg, and they have 6 children, and they also serve as foster and adoptive parents. So, Julie, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about bullying from the perspective of a counselor. And you're working with children and teenagers. You're working with families as well. But tell us, from your perspective, what do we need to know about bullying?
That's a great question. Particularly with the use of social media, I think bullying is taking on a new form. And I think the suffering, the the hard things that happen to kids is increasing exponentially with the use of digital media, because what used to once be limited to maybe a school setting or the typical recess bullying now almost permeates every area of life for a young person. And we see this as well on the college campuses. And so from elementary to high school to college, the shape of bullying, I think, has really changed. And for most kids who are suffering from bullying, what adds to the grievousness of it is it's not just happening in school anymore. It feels like it permeates all of their life, every area. They can't get away from it. And as you all know, when things go digital, they're public and permanent. They never go away. And it's really hard to shake that. And kids feel a sense of hopelessness. So those are the things I tend to see in counseling that really scare me for young people, that they feel both isolated, hopeless, and that the whole world now knows things about them that they can't contain.
Yeah. So the smartphone came on the scene just a little bit more than 10 years ago, thanks to Steve Jobs and the folks at Apple, with the iPhone. And what was that, 2007, Kenton, I think, is when the smartphone comes on the scene. So you've been counseling since before then. When you said exponentially, just how it's increased, how have you seen that work out, or have you seen that work out in your counseling load? And I'm not asking you to, break any confidences here, but just generally speaking, the big picture, you as a counselor, other counselors that you know, have you had to spend more time addressing the issue of bullying as it's become more widespread, more intense?
Absolutely. I think the struggle is you don't often hear kids coming and using the language bullying, but that is what is happening. And you see an increase in anxiety. You see an increase in social anxiety for sure. And I think there is a connection. It'd be great to see if there's any research on this, but there's a connection between social anxiety, the use of social media, and bullying that occurs. So it's quite interesting to note that a lot of young people aren't coming in saying they're bullied, but as you begin to hear their stories, that is what seems to be happening.
What would be some words that they would use, or descriptors, if they don't use the word, hey, or the sentence, hey, I'm being bullied? What are the kinds of things we need to listen for as parents or as youth workers that would give us insights into the fact that, yes, indeed, they are being bullied?
Great question. So a lot of young people, particularly teenagers, you see them come in or express anxiety, depression, hopelessness, and they don't start off talking about what's going on online or what's going on socially. They start off with their feelings, and you see the behaviors of anxiety. You see withdrawing behaviors. You see just a desire to avoid school at all costs or avoid social situations. So those are factors I begin looking for, and I wonder what's happened to them or what's going on behind the scenes relationally and in their world that's causing that.
Do you find that parents and youth workers are clued into this, like they're picking up on these signals, or are we more or less missing them?
I think we miss them until they become really, really serious. So I wish we would catch them more quickly. I wish we would see the signs sooner. And I guess that goes to more preventative and proactive measures from an adult standpoint, where we are actively engaged in children's lives and teenagers' worlds. Because if we're not, then we often will catch it way too late.
Okay, I want to come back and talk about those, but Chris and I were talking before we went on here just about how not only the nature of bullying has changed, but some older folks, they have a viewpoint that, they hear about, kids are making too much of this. We had tough stuff when we were kids. People are overreacting to this. Are we classifying too much as bullying, or has the world changed so much that we need to classify a lot more as bullying? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and I have very mixed feelings about this, so hopefully I'll be clear and helpful on it. There is a strand of thinking where are we overeducating young kids on bullying? And I've occasionally heard one of my kids, as you know, I have 6 of them, one of them say, "My brother's bullying me," because that's the language she's learning in school, where the reality is they're just picking on each other. They're being mean, but have we now taken it to another level? So I have a little bit of a concern that we keep bullying in the right category. And it's easy to start switching language out from being picked on to someone having a mean moment to all of a sudden now I'm being bullied. So I don't want to overuse the language or the word for sure. I want it in its right context. However, I think the whole field of cyberbullying is far worse than most adults imagine as well. So I could see both spectrums existing, but when we enter particularly into the digital type of bullying, I think it's far worse than we imagine at times.
That's good. Besides the world of digital technology, is there anything else that you've identified or seen that is a factor contributing to this epidemic of bullying?
I would say the devaluing of others, the loss of teaching character traits of caring for others above ourselves, where I don't want to pick on poor young people, but there is a sense of entitlement, there's a sense of individualism and materialism, and don't want to overuse the word narcissism, but if kids are raised that way, then it just breeds an attitude of devaluing others. And we see this in so many ways. I mean, what contributes to bullying is the whole struggle with sexting and pornography and all the things that lead to objectifying one another. And we learn not to consider others above ourselves. We learn not to live in relationship and put others first. So I think that's key. You can't keep character and empathy and important qualities like that out of the mix.
So we often say here, because people ask us this, and I just talked to someone about this morning. They asked, they're at CPYU, what would you say is the biggest trend we need to address with our kids? And we always go back to the fact that it's the brokenness and sin in our lives, which people have struggled with since our first parents decided to rebel against God. So when I think about bullying, I think that bullying is obviously rooted in our brokenness. It's rooted in our sin. And I want to ask you a question with that in mind, just about the bully, because you said a bit before about, teaching our kids, being prophetic and being preventive in terms of teaching our kids rather than waiting till something happens. So let's say, you're a parent and you want to steer a child away from being the perpetrator, from being the bully. Are there specific types of sin? I hope this is a fair question, but I wondered about this. I wrote this down. Do you see specific types of sin that facilitate the bully? Specific types of brokenness that that I'll use the word people use now, trigger the bully and the bullying behavior?
The first thing that comes to mind are our lack of character qualities like empathy, compassion, sympathy, whether a child is wired to not have those strengths in them or whether they're character issues. Or a lot of times you think a bully is coming from broken homes themselves or being bullied or abused or mistreated. I would turn to the character qualities. Does this person feel empathy and compassion for others? Are they pretty self-centered? Do they tend to want all the attention and do things to seek attention to the detriment of others? Those are huge red flags to me.
Yeah. Have you seen shifts? And this is a curious question on my part, because I shared with the guys that when I was young, growing up, I think because of my stature and my age in my neighborhood, I was bullied. It was clearly that. I mean, I was terrified at times to go outside and to play with the guys because I expected more of what I had received before. But then when I got older and I increased in size and confidence, the tables turned for me. And I, with great regret, would admit, that I did some bullying myself. Do you see that a lot? I mean, because it seems to me that that's something we need to warn parents about, if in fact that is common and not limited to me. Because I have seen it in other people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you're making, that when we don't give a framework to kids who have been harmed themselves, sinned against, received suffering themselves, then what do they do when they start feeling emboldened, or they start feeling confident, or they feel like, I'm not going to let this happen to me anymore? Then our tendency is to turn and say, I'm not going to let anybody mistreat me. And we, in turn, can end up mistreating others as a result. So that makes a lot of sense that we would see that dynamic if there isn't somebody shepherding our teenagers or our children through life.
Yeah. When you talk to parents, and I would even say, just based on what you said, it was neat to hear about your kids, how they would interact with each other, because I think that's fairly universal. When you talk to parents or talk to your own kids about those sorts of things, do you ever mention lessons or perspectives on what can come out of bullying or being victimized by bullying, or maybe just even being picked on, that are good things? Are there ways that we can redeem this in our lives, or see God work in our lives and bring about some redemption, bring good out of it?
Yeah, I love how you said that. I think that is redeeming things. That's what I love that you just said, that we need to speak a lot more about how everything in our life is not in vain. And when we have a sovereign God who loves us and we are discipling our kids, He can take the hardest things in our lives and use them for good. So I don't want to minimize being mistreated or victimized or sinned against or harmed in any way, but I also want to give hope that it can be redeemed and something good can come out of it, that beauty can come from ashes in our lives.
My friend Dean Borgman, I remember him talking about how resilience is built in young people. And two of the factors in that, two of the ingredients in building resilience, and he mentions about 4 or 5, but two that I remember. One is a loving home where a young person can retreat into that. And so for me, with resilience, in my memory, I remember leaving the middle school, which is where bullying really was at its worst, or just being a human being and functioning as a human being was especially tough, and feeling an increased sense of relief the closer the school bus got to home, to the point where when my hand hit the back doorknob, it was kind of like you could just let down, So there was a sense of resilience there because there was shelter. So that was one thing, the family, and then a positive, accepting, encouraging peer group, which to me, that's what youth groups should be. Is there anything else that you would add to that, or specifics that youth pastors and parents should be aware of that can help facilitate that kind of resilience in kids to serve as a buffer?
Yeah, one of the metaphors I like to refer to in counseling, and I do this with my own kids, is just retelling their story. That our lives are a story, and we have a good and faithful author, that's our Creator. And the challenge is that sometimes we get stuck in the details of our story, or the chapter of our story, or the suffering or the hard thing happening in our story. And we forget that He who began a good work is going to be faithful to complete it. And I'm tempted to take the pen or the pencil out of God's hands and erase people and characters in and out of my story, or to try to be the author of my own story. And I look at so many hard things my own children have gone through, and I think a key is that I don't minimize the details of their story, but I help reinterpret them in a way that points them to the Creator and reminds them that God is up to something good in their lives, no matter what chapter they're in, no matter what difficulty is happening. And so what we're doing is we're providing stability and encouragement. Youth group is a safe place, peers and parents. But we also have to be committed to helping them understand their story redemptively, because left to their own devices, they're going to try to make sense of their experiences. And we all tend to do that without And without any loving guidance, we tend to interpret it the wrong way.
So what you're saying is parents really need to understand this as another way to take the lead in the ongoing Christian nurture, that whole Deuteronomy 6 idea of taking life circumstances and planting them in the biblical narrative, because that's where we are. That's where our story's being worked out. Are there mistakes that parents make when a young person comes to them and says, sixth grader, ninth grader, I'm getting hammered at school, or I'm being picked on in school, or I'm being bullied by so-and-so? Talk about that a little bit. How can we put it in the right perspective, and are we guilty most of the time of minimizing that?
I think probably both extremes. We minimize it or we overreact and we mishandle it. So the wisdom issues of parenting are always problematic, aren't they? Because you have to look at the situation and say, is loving my child right now helping them walk through how to think about this and teaching them the skills of engaging in it and biblical peacemaking or going and getting help in school? Or when is it so concerning and grievous that it is my job to step in and protect my child? But I'm making those decisions based on the need of the moment, the situation, and what wisdom requires versus maybe my own natural tendencies as a parent to want to be a helicopter parent or a mama bear coming out or a parent that just says, brush it off, you're okay.
Now, you said a couple of things there that I want to ask a quick question about before we take a break, and that is the difference between underreacting and then overreacting and helicopter parenting. Over the course, I'm curious about this. Over the course of your career as a counselor, there's been a lot of cultural change, a lot of shifts. 15 years ago, I don't think anybody talked about helicopter parenting or this new term I've heard, snowplow parenting. The question that I have on that is, specifically, what is the harm that we do with that? And have you had to intervene and tell parents, look, step back, you're doing too much? Do you do that more now than you used to? Does the over-involvement seem to be a problem more than it used to be?
That's a fascinating question. I think we are involved in all the wrong ways and under-involved in all the wrong ways with our kids at times. So what tends to drive that in an unhealthy way is my own value system as a parent. If I value my children being excelling in sports or academics, if I value them excelling at something else, then I am becoming the helicopter parent, or I'm going to push that and be really engaged. If I don't have a vision for discipleship in my kids, I'm not going to be talking to them. I'm not going to be fostering conversation around the dining room table. Might not even be having dinner with my kids because I'm valuing all the wrong things, getting them to sports and lessons and helping them succeed because of my fear of what other families are accomplishing or comparing my family to another family rather than saying, what are the needs of my home? I need to be an expert at knowing my own children. And when I do that, I'm going to be actively engaged in all the right ways.
Yeah. This is good. You're talking about parenting and what social media has done to parenting with comparison. I just heard a quote. Rich Van Pelt, I don't know if I told you the guys this. He was sharing with me something that Brennan Manning once said, don't judge your insides by everybody else's outsides. Which I had to, think about that a little bit. And I thought that's that comparison thing. So this is good, Julie. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break. We're chatting with Julie Lowe from the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation about bullying. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're excited to announce that one of our most popular CPYU resources of all time has just been released in an updated and revised format. Tens of thousands of kids have been trained by their parents and youth workers to think Christianly about music and media with our How to Use Your Head to Guard Your Heart 3D Guide to Making Wise Media Choices. This easy-to-use teaching tool needs to be in your youth ministry toolbox if you desire to teach your students to integrate their faith into all of life. Jesus calls us to follow him, and that includes following him into the 6 to 9 hours a day of screen time that shape and mold the beliefs and behaviors of our kids. To learn more about our 3D Media Evaluation Guide and to order a copy for every member of your youth group, go to our website at cpyu.org. Teach your kids to engage with media to the glory of God. Well, we seem to love to talk about the tough issues here on Youth Culture Matters, and today we're tackling one of those, which is bullying. Certainly getting a lot of attention in our culture. We talk about it a lot. We hear about it a lot. It's in the news a lot. Usually it's after a horrendous event where a young person gets in trouble or has taken their own life. We're talking to Julie Lowe about bullying. We need to understand this, and we need to understand that there's a narrative in which to understand this. That's the biblical narrative as opposed to the cultural narrative. There are some great things we're hearing from people in the culture about bullying, but we love to consult with people who have thought about this from the perspective of Christian faith. So Julie is a counselor at the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation in Glenside, Pennsylvania, and does a lot of teaching and instruction as well. She's written quite a bit on this and thought about it a lot, and so we're happy to have her here. Julie, during the break, we talked a little bit about 13 Reasons Why, which youth workers, parents are really aware of this. We're learning that, and certainly something we need to be aware of. But you brought it up just in relationship to what we're talking about today, bullying. Share some of your thoughts on that you were talking about during the break. It was interesting.
Sure. One of the things that stood out to me as I was watching it was the absence of helpful adults through the series, that adults were portrayed as either clueless or inadequate. And that really hit me hard, probably both as a parent, as a counselor, as an adult who thinks that is the message kids are getting. And that needs to change. On several counts, it's sometimes how the media portrays life, and it's sometimes the media reflecting life. And there's one of the challenges of that program. But I think, unfortunately, young people walked away with that idea being validated, that we as adults are inadequate or clueless to know how to help them. And I think the burden falls on us to prove to kids and young people that we care about them, that we want to know them, that we're going to pursue them and engage in their world. So that was one of my takeaways as I was watching it.
I love the way you phrase that. I wish you didn't have to, but adults being clueless or inadequate as a dad and now as a grandfather, I think about that. And that's just exactly who we don't want to be and who we're not called to be. Let me ask you some very practical questions here, and I really want to hear what you have to say to this, your answers to this. But bystanders, okay, so you're not the perpetrator, you're not the victim, but you're in the hallway, you're in the classroom, you're looking at the Instagram, the Snapchat, the Facebook, wherever it is the kids are living, and you see your friend or someone you know or a peer being victimized by bullying. How can we equip bystanders to intervene?
Great question. I wonder, again, as a parent, I'm thinking of even my own children, where there are very different personalities going on. Some are very bold. They'll jump in and say, hey, that's wrong. Then I have kids who are so timid, they would never be brave enough to intervene in a moment, but they could be brave in different ways. Bravery might look like I go up to the victim afterwards and say, I am so sorry, that was wrong. Let's go talk to somebody about it. It could be going to an adult on their behalf and explaining what's happening. There are multiple ways to demonstrate standing up for others and being brave. So I want to always nurture that in young people, that you need to, when you see wrong being done, you need to take a stand for it. But then I want to be thoughtful in helping them find that there could be dozens of ways you take a stand. There could be dozens of ways you intervene and demonstrate care to other people.
This is good. These are the kinds of things not only parents need to do, but those of you who are youth workers, you need to be talking about this, offering these options to kids. Now, here's a big question. Because many of us grew up with this in Christian homes and in the church. This is not just a way of thinking about pushing back on bullying that's out there, in the world, but the whole idea of retaliation. Hey, if he punches you, sock him back. If he picks on you, pick on him back. How do we talk about that? I just don't know as someone who grew up with all kinds of options, in the heat of the moment, I'm trying to think what's the best way to do that. As a Christian, I'm thinking totally about turning the other cheek and thinking about what Jesus said about confrontation and being a peacemaker. Any word as a counselor to parents who might take that approach that is more volatile and even violent in terms of pushing back?
Yeah, I think sometimes, again, that speaks to the adult's perspective that has to be addressed. But there's so many ways. If my children were genuinely in danger, or a child was genuinely in danger, I would hope I would teach them the skills of protecting themselves. That's very different than saying, I am going to go toe-to-toe with somebody and show them who's boss. There's just no Christ-likeness in that at all. So I don't believe children need to sit around and get beat up. I think they need to learn to protect themselves. But I think there are also ways that they can get help. Biblical peacemaking is you start as private as possible and go as public as necessary. You go and try to work things out with somebody. When that's impossible, you bring somebody along. When that's not possible, you bring 2 or 3 others until it goes before the church. So again, this principle is as private as possible and as public as necessary. So when there is violence, when somebody is physically being harmed, you go as public as quickly as you need to. So you're looking at what is the level of bullying that's occurring and how do I provide intervention, rather than just say beat the kid up or punch him back. Because what happens if your son or daughter comes back with broken bones and in the hospital? It's not wise, for one, but it also pragmatically might end up creating more harm than good.
Yeah, that's good. Good advice. Well, another question here, getting kids to open up. From your experience as a counselor, and you've written about this, but I want to hear you share this, what are some of the ways that parents can begin to engage in conversation with their kids? How can we encourage that?
It is a genuine interest in their world. And some parents feel maybe inadequate to know how to start. And there's all kinds of creative ways to get help. We have table topics that sit on our dining room table, and we just do it to foster conversation. And here it is years later, I've got soon to be 5 teenagers in my house, and they ask if they can pull a card and ask a question. That's just all about fostering conversation and relationship. And sitting there, going around the table, and everybody answering it and engaging in it says, I'm valuing their thoughts. I'm letting them develop their own thoughts and opinions. And that simple act is building bridges with them that when they're struggling and when there's something hard going on in the school, I'm demonstrating to them that their parent cares and listens to their thinking, even if I disagree. I'm giving them the ability to disagree in safe ways. And if we're not nurturing that in what seems to be the mundane moments, when the really important ones come, we will tend to miss them.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, let's switch over to the youth group then. Our youth groups need to be places that are safe, that are caring, where kids of all shapes and sizes and dealing with all sorts of difficulties in life are able to come and be comfortable, loved, accepted, then challenged, certainly, obviously. But how do we, as youth workers, create that kind of setting?
I think what you're talking about is creating a culture of valuing others. We're learning to consider others above ourselves. We're learning to be a fragrant offering. That's fostered in multiple ways. Many youth groups do that naturally through service projects or missions trips. What you're doing is you're getting young people to think outside themselves in the way they serve and give back to the community. But in youth group itself, you do that naturally in relationship where you're saying, we want to develop a culture of loving and valuing others above ourselves, where there's a zero tolerance for mistreatment, where you're talking about what it looks like to stand up for others and walk alongside the person that feels like an outcast. And we're teaching them to be proactive and not reactive. The more we foster those things, and I think a key both in parenting and in youth groups is even role playing, bringing up the what ifs and bringing up the gray areas of life. And things that seem kind of messy, because what you're doing is you're teaching the skill to young people to evaluate what it looks like to help somebody. And there's so much gray areas that kids aren't used to.
In your counseling experience, have there been situations where when you're digging deep into what's beneath and behind all this, it becomes obvious to you that the church has failed or the youth group has failed? If you've had those situations where the church is actually complicit, let's say, or the youth group's complicit in the bullying or even in degrading a young person, how have you seen that happen? Is that a fair question to ask? Is it?
Yeah, let me talk that out for a minute. I think, places that immediately come to mind is where there have been a grooming and abusive behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And we tend to be blind to that. Where it can get really tricky and gray is, again, when maybe it's not outright abuse, but it's control and manipulation, and where there's a power differential, and we don't acknowledge the harm that can be done, or we minimize the effect, and we think, or we put the weight on a child or teenager that maybe they're overreacting or they're misreading a situation. So I think it's giving kids the freedom to say there's something that makes me uncomfortable. Doesn't mean I always agree with them, and it might mean having conversations to help them think well about it, but we don't listen very well.
Yeah. I've always thought, in my own experience in youth ministry, a lot of the things that we planned and we did in terms of activities, I didn't realize this at the time, but they were demeaning to certain kids because they didn't have the aptitude or the ability to really get involved. The other issue that I guess I have to go back and say I'm sorry to a lot of people about, if I can remember specifics, is just, in youth ministry we love humor. And many times our humor is, we abuse our gift of humor, and we do things that are inappropriate that really do hurt kids without us knowing it. And, any advice on that?
Yeah, you bring out a really good point, that there are very timid, insecure kids in youth group who the worst thing you can do is poke fun at them, even though you're trying to draw them in and engage them. And that works with some teenagers, and they really like it. You end up being the cool youth group leader. And then there are some kids that are just utterly mortified by it. And when, again, I go back to this idea of being an expert at knowing the kids in front of you, that when we're committed to knowing the young people in our group really well, we learn to love and minister differently depending on the child in front of us.
This is really good. I know we're winding down here, and I want to ask you about resources. One thing I'll tell folks is that we are going to include on our homepage, if you are not listening through the CPYU podcast, Youth Culture Matters homepage, go there and you'll find links to everything that's mentioned. We're going to include links to CCEF, the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, as well as some videos that Julie has done on this topic, and an interview she did on this in a CCEF publication. But are there any other resources you can point us to that would be really, really helpful?
There are lots of great parenting books out right now that talk about building relationship with kids. One of the books as well that leans towards the idea of cyberbullying and social media is a book called Public and Permanent by Richard Gurry. He talks a lot about teaching young people that if they were just to be more aware that everything they put out there is both public and permanent, it would change the way they live in the social media world. So that would be a great resource I'd recommend.
That's one I haven't heard of. Have you guys heard of that one? Or okay. Well, we'll include that. Anything from CCEF? You folks have loads and loads of great resources. The little booklets and all that is just wonderful. And your counselors there, folks at CCEF, are writing more books. I've listened to podcasts. I just went through all the work that Ed Welch and David Pallison did on anxiety, which was really good. Anything specific to this topic that might be helpful that you could point us to off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot here.
You are putting me on the spot. If you go to CCF's website and Google family issues and particular things, there will be a lot of resources that come up, blogs, short videos, and primarily. Paul Tripp's no longer with us, but still a great resource. And he recently came out with a book called Parenting 14 Gospel Principles, and that would be a great
That is a great book, yeah. And when you say he's no longer with us, we're not announcing his death. He is still living. No, that's good. We're not announcing his death. He's not with CCEF. Shame on him, huh? Yeah. Yeah, we love his stuff. And I'll tell you one more thing I'm going to mention there related to Paul, and that is his devotional book, New Morning Mercies, which I and several of our friends are using right now, is just phenomenal. And I'll tell you, between that book and a book with Spurgeon called Morning by Morning and Scotty Smith's Everyday Prayers, it's just a great way to start the day. And that's above and beyond the Scriptures. So Paul Tripp is a great resource. Are there any other parenting books that you folks are putting in the hands of people there that you'd recommend?
Well, I'm in the process of writing one. I have a contract with New Growth right now, so hopefully that will come out in the next year, we hope.
Do you have a title for that, or am I
Not
asking you?
yet.
Okay, well, that's
Not
the toughest
yet.
part sometimes is coming up with a title. Well, we'll keep our ear to the ground on that one, and we'll look forward to that. Well, this is good. We will also put up on our webpage, since we've talked a little bit here about cyberbullying, we will put up a link to a handout we have that's a parent's guide to cyberbullying that we've put together for our Digital Kids Initiative. It's rather extensive and lets you know what to look for. Also, some prophetic, preventive, and redemptive steps are on that. And anything else we come up with, we'll add to our list of things there. So, Julie, thanks so much for doing this, and thanks so much for your ministry at CCEF. We love what you folks are doing. Your gift to the kingdom, your gift to us, and we look forward to continuing to have conversations with you and point people towards what you're doing.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks. So, thanks again to everyone for tuning in and listening to this episode of Youth Culture Matters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.